But today we have a very special guest to an organization that's very near and dear to my heart. This is Carrie DeMott. Please say hello.
Aloha. Hi, Clint. Hi, Byron.
Hello. So Carrie represents the Nahali o Maui, which is something that has been a long-standing champion of affordable housing, but more importantly, affordable housing in perpetuity. And it's actually incredibly unique process in which they acquire properties, usually through foreclosure, but in what we'll talk about through a construction process as well. And they actually own it in partnership with the resident that stays in there. And it's just phenomenal process that allows people to transition, which about 80% do, into the normal housing market afterward. That's about 80% or so. So I would love her to dive into it and give us some of the details. But I always want to take credit for it, even though we only had a small part. Basically, initially, John Anderson,
Mhm.
he is the founder, came to our family, and we worked collaboratively together to get the incorporation documents and, more importantly, provide the initial funding for the organization. So this was really essential because and my favorite part about it is the fact that it actually has a revolving board. To me, I think any 501c3 has a tendency, has a potential of being abused, like let's just say certain, pink ribbon organizations. And the process in which you can have a revolving board prevents that. And you don't get that kind of, entrenched or, people giving housing to their own. So again, Carrie, go on and tell us a little bit about Nahali Maui.
Hi. Well, thank you. I want to get back to that board thing because it is very unique. But I think you do have an audience that are real estate buffs, I'm sure. But just to make sure that everybody understands what perpetuity means, I was a teacher. Perpetuity means forever. So our homes remain affordable for generation after generation after generation. So that is what makes us different for affordable housing. So Nahalio Maui was organized. I guess it's really nice. I didn't know your family was part of that
Oh
in,
yeah.
in 2006 and became the 501c3 in 2007. And it was community members getting together and looking at what was happening in the housing market at the time, which were mass foreclosures, the Great Recession. It was just a really hard time. I was here and I was watching families leave and houses go empty. It was a really tough time everywhere. And seeing that, the community realized they wanted to stabilize the neighborhood. And with community funds, as well as neighborhood stabilization grants, they were able to start purchasing these foreclosed properties. Of course, nobody was living in them. That's one of our things. We would never pick up a home that someone is in that situation unless we were helping them get out of the situation. Pick them up and then begin the process. And so with our community land trust, basically we take the land is held by the community, and then the house is what is purchased by the homeowner. So they retain the property and we keep the land in trust. And that community, you mentioned the board, it's a tripartite board. So it includes homeowners. We have 3 homeowners out of our 9. That's
Mhm.
actually, I was on the board, so I was one of the homeowners on the board.
All right.
And then we have community members too. And it's a wide range of experts. It can be in real estate, they can be local activists. I really like to have a mix of people and people in title and escrow. So all that contracts and keeping an eye and oversight on everything. So it really makes sure that the land is used and is very community minded. So
So
yeah,
is
go
it,
ahead.
for in simpler terms for people like me, is it like I'm buying a leasehold property? Is that what it kind of is? I'm buying a leasehold property with restrictions when I sell it?
Correct. It's leasehold, but it's leasehold for 99 years and then it can
Hmm.
be renewed. So your heirs could inherit it. And the lease fee, it starts out as like at $40 a month. goes up every 5 years, not very much. So it's minuscule. The kind of the restrictions on it would be maybe what it could be used for. You couldn't have it as a house that you rent out to people. So you couldn't do that, go move off and have that be a home that you're making money off of. So you do have, it has to be a primary residence.
So a couple of things I want to dive into for a community land trust and talking about these leasehold properties. So, you know, as we evolve and we try to create a more, you know, egalitarian options for people to have affordable housing here on island, you know, I do genuinely think we need to have a variety of asset classes and property types. And I really think that Nahalio Maui needs to be given the full, and other programs like it, not specifically, but they really need to be given the full backing of the county and having a large allotment of taxes set aside. For the acquisition of land, for working collaboratively with the construction industry of Maui, and you know the Chamber of Commerce, because we all function together in a society that suffers from the overinflation of real estate prices. And while I really genuinely think that, you know, there should always be the majority being free market and open real estate, there needs to be something set aside for people to have affordable housing, because there's just simply no gateway for people to enter and have a place to live that doesn't, you know, basically absorb 60-70% of their income. And it's really becoming obscenely difficult for people to just simply go by. And the reason this mechanism is so essential is because people get into these properties, they live there, and they're making payments, they're building equity, and then afterwards, they trade out and they have all this money saved up, which allows them to pay down a potential mortgage, to have the patience and time to sit in line and wait for a property, you know, that's on a different class, that's not a leasehold property. Because it's, you know, when you look at some of the projects that have come up on the market, you know, there's homes in upcountry that have come on the market that were available through affordable housing grants and processes in the county. They're $850,000, $950,000, and it's a oftentimes 3-4 year process before they're even available. So what's somebody going to do in that meantime as they're waiting? You know, that's why this is, to me, an essential part of the transition. And all those homes would have been great if they went to, you know, people that needed affordable housing. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, less than half that are going to people because they don't have that time. They don't have the ability to just wait and wait and wait. So this is an essential lily pad before you take the next step to home ownership and getting into it. And then the most important thing about actual ownership of real estate is, of course, the savings. That money goes into it and it builds equity for your retirement in the future, the option to do a reverse mortgage when you're older, something to pass on to your family, you know, things of that nature. So let's go in a little bit more of that. I mean, I'd love to hear some of the case stories of how this is such an important, you know, financial instrument for people trying to acquire property.
Well, I can speak specifically for myself, being that I'd been teaching on island for, I think it was probably about 14 years at the time, and was in a very unstable housing situation, like everyone here. And this is, of course, before the fire. And we were just, it was really, really stressful, very bad. I had a young child and no ability to save. I mean, we had our health costs. It was just chucking out money for rent. And thankfully we were able to come into this. And since then I'm able to focus on saving up for retirement, like you mentioned. Also just having the stability for my son. And, you know, long term, all the data shows that stable housing for children exponentially improves their outcomes later in life, their education, the stability of the family, Parents are less stressed. They don't have to work multiple jobs, so they can be there for their family. So I think like when you think about financial positives, besides just the money you're able to save, it's the ability to have the time, which is invaluable, to spend with your family, which is, I think, one of the most valuable things that we have here. It's why we have the Ohana. I mean, that's what Maui is. It's families. So it is that ability to build wealth. You can build equity. And one of the differences between our community land trusts and some other community land trusts around the country is that there is a shared equity. So when a family, and we have had 2 families move into what we would term like the regular market, one here on island, was that there is a shared equity. The longer time you're in the house, you get more percentage of that. So, but then the house is resold at an affordable rate to another family.
That in perpetuity part.
In
And
perpetuity,
there
over and over
is,
and over.
yeah, just so people are aware, there is a whole variety of different affordable housing options on the island, but there's not going to be enough, unfortunately. There is about a desperate need for 10,000 or so homes. And one of the big hopes and one of the things that the state did was passed a law in order to allow for the acquisition of, or not acquisition, to allow for the changing of zoning. So the hope is to take, low value land that doesn't have the appropriate zoning in order to be converted into, places for housing. Because the ostracized and difficult process of between going from county to state is very difficult and time consuming. And, we in here, Hawaii and Maui specifically, have some of the most difficult zoning and permitting laws anywhere in the United States. I mean, even you guys have to deal with it when building homes. So, just to get into this a little bit more, as opposed to going and using the law for its intention to actually provide affordable housing and build more, like through programs Nahalio Maui or working with other developers so that they can acquire land, what ended up happening is they immediately went to withhold property rights from 7,100 vacation rentals on the island. That's about a third of all vacation rentals, generates about $200 million in tax income for the county, and more importantly, $20 million a year for the Affordable Housing Fund. So that money is, of course, normally set aside for developers to be made whole when they lose money on these developments, because when they make these developments for affordable housing, they're not making a profit typically. And without that income, of course, we'll see if it happens. This would be the third attempt at stripping these property rights, and it's unlikely to happen, but you just don't know. With this new law, it is a potential, but it's more important, I think, to work on feasible options for creating housing for people as opposed to trying to play a game of cups with property ownership. So, to get more into Nahalio Maui and some of the projects that you guys have worked on, I know, and you spoke about the fire. What happened with the large project that you guys had over in Lahaina?
Well, we built 12 homes in Kahoma. We were granted another home there. We have a total of 15 properties on the west side, and 14 of those homes were completely destroyed.
Mm.
Yeah, it was just awful. I will say we're grateful that the families are okay. And but it's been very traumatic for them, obviously. And so we're trying to get into the path of helping them with the rebuild process. We were able to get some grant funds to immediately give each family about $10,000. And right at the get-go, with no stipulations of how to use it, just here's some emergency money, and we were able to link them up with some information with insurance. But it was very different and challenging in that we were not in control of the building, the rebuild. We can't just go, okay, step aside, we've got this for you, we're going to turn everything in for you, this is how it's going to be handled. Because they are the owners of the property, they have to go through their insurance companies, and it's been really challenging. Also, one of our families was the first to get a permit to build. Yeah, in Lahaina, which is really cool. But also, if you're the first in line, you are gonna
You get
be
to
the
jump through all the hurdles and learn about all the pitfalls and the new regulations and be the guinea pig for this
oh,
new
so
process.
many new regulations and this changing and that changing and everybody trying to help, but nobody on the same page. And I was on the phone a lot going, can we just all get in the same call? And can we make a couple of checklists? I just want a checklist.
So
So
let's
that,
actually talk a little bit about that. Now that you guys are rebuilding over in Lahaina and going through that, so many people who have experienced Maui's permitting process might not realize this, but in order to cut through the red tape and not have to deal with the overwhelming stipulations that the zoning practices have here, what's different now in Lahaina? I've heard that they've actually hired company in order to process that.
yes, they hired Four Leaf.
Four leaf, okay.
And they've been helping bring everything through and doing some inspections and really streamlining the process. I mean, it was a little bumpy at first, but definitely a big help. I actually met Mike Renner and some of the folks from Four Leaf. I went to the After the Fire Summit in
Hmm.
California with the Maui delegation. It's a really unique experience, and it was great because I got connected with other nonprofit foundations, and it was unique in that our government members, they didn't just bring like all their little like buddies. Sometimes you just bring everybody who agrees with you. It like had the Maui Rapid Response and um, you know,
Things of that
Maui
nature.
Strong. It was great. It was really a good group of people and a lot of resources on the mainland from communities who had rebuilt after the fire,
Hmm.
like in Santa Rosa. So talking with those folks and hearing about the challenges they had. For instance, when you start into this second year, a year after the fire, and get into the rebuild, you have to be very cautious about scams and fraud.
Yeah,
And
I've seen a lot of that going around.
yeah, so working together with the other organizations to help facilitate these homeowners through the process so they don't gonna end up getting scammed.
And I
Um,
know you guys have, of course, insurance for your homes, but how bad was the shortfall? Because one of the big problems that everybody's facing is the fact that the cost of building has increased so dramatically. So, how significant have these shortfalls been, and are there grants available to kind of help you make those gaps up?
we're working on the grants. I think that's
Yeah.
been something that the county's been trying. They give granted some money to the Lahaina Community Land Trust to try and facilitate that as well. We're working on that. What I found was because the costs have basically doubled in the rebuild, that everybody's has some form of shortfall. I do want to educate our anybody listening who's in the rebuild process that if you had 80% or more insured, it's something called co-insurance, and you can reach out to your insurance provider and they will give you more money. You got to ask,
All right.
but they will give you more money, and that can help kind of bridge that gap. Also, getting multiple estimates is really important. And
Hmm.
if you're using the same plans, if you're for the newer houses, you'll go through the permitting process quicker. It'll be easier for you to get estimates. But if you're making changes, know that architectural changes, even the extension of a roof, can add tens of thousands to the cost. So you want to be really cautious with that as well and know what you're getting into before you do it.
All right.
Now,
Well, go ahead.
so I want to step out of Lahaina because I'm interested in. I was looking at nahaleomaui.org website. My question is two things. Why are what's holding Nahale Maui from building more homes, or buying more homes? And the second thing is, um, can any buyer, meaning like let's say I make 500,000, is there any kind of income thing, or how can people know more about this? Because I know about it from our bank, but a lot of people in the community may not know about it. Could you help me on those two?
Sure. So I guess the reason why we don't have more properties is because we're a nonprofit. So we get our money from wonderful community donations. So people here that care about the community being the community, from the community foundations that we apply for grant funding. and from government agencies. So that's how we get our funding. And then we've pivoted from building, acquiring low-cost houses and rehabbing them, depending on what the market's doing. And now with the median price, I mean, it dropped a little bit, so maybe we're at 1.3, but that's a lot of money. So, and if we're trying to aim at selling these houses for under 500,000, that amount that we kind of cover, that gap is just, it's becoming so much, which is why we're going to be building. We were granted 7 lots over in the fairways in Maui Lani. So that takes out that land cost. We're covering like the taxes and fees. And so we're working to get estimates on different builders to build 7 homes over there for families. They should be larger homes, 3 to 4 bedroom homes. In terms of how someone can become a qualified buyer with us, you have to have, we work with people within the median income of 80% to 120 mostly. In some cases, we might work up to 140% just because of costs. We have a process, so we do an educational seminar to let people know what we do, who we are, because we're not for everybody. Like you had mentioned earlier, there needs to be different alternatives. So some families are looking for an affordable rental opportunity. We don't do rentals. Maybe if they get into an affordable rental, they can start getting a nest egg. Taking financial literacy classes can really help. And that is part of our process. We start with a seminar. This is what we do. This is who we are. And then we move on to financial education classes, and we have linked up with some other groups. I'm sorry, somebody's banging on the door. Linked up with some other groups to help provide those financial literacy courses, and that's to help educate people on their sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. So in that process of getting people educated, as well as training them for the process of home ownership, because that's really what this is. Even though it is a leasehold ownership, it is home ownership in a partnership with a 501c3. So go on a little bit more about this process of the becoming educated so that you can qualify for one of these Nahale o Maui homes.
Okay, so first, you can go onto our website and sign up to get on our list, and then we will inform you of when our seminars are. We do have a pretty big list because we have, like, we've been dealing with a lot of issues trying to help our Lahaina homeowners. But we're going to start off with some online ones just to kind of get people educated so they know whether we're right for them. And then they'll move on to sign up for one of the financial literacy courses, which can be really, really helpful. Teaching people how to raise up their credit score, how to deal with consumer debt. I think that is something that we should be educating everyone on, especially our kids as they're getting out of high school. We could all use a little bit of that. And then once they do the financial literacy courses, they go to a bank, and they can, of course, go to ASB, and they can get a more, see how much they are qualified for. And once they get through the process and they meet the 80% through, 140% area median income, then we will meet with them for the 4th step and go over what our ground lease is. So explain in detail what that is.
How does this differ from a more traditionally and well-known leasehold for people from Hawaiian homelands? So typically people with Native Hawaiian blood, they qualify to purchase. Of course, there is what they often refer to as the death list, because people will be on it so long that they will often pass away before the property becomes available. But more importantly, the limited nature in which people can qualify for this is they have to have Hawaiian blood. Now, Nahale o Maui is different. So tell us a little bit more about how those two different organizations are separate.
Well, from what I know, so there's nothing in ethnicity at all, so that we calculate when we're doing our home buyer selection. It's a blind selection. The process is, if you've become an income qualified buyer, yes, you're on the list. And if we have a home open, we send out information. Hey, we've got some viewings. You can sign up for an appointment. Come take a look at the house. The family comes and takes a look at the house. If they're interested in it, they put their names down, and then they make sure they have everything set up, because you might have gotten income qualified a year ago, but as Byron mentioned, we guys were talking about interest rates. If interest rates have gone up, if you've had job issues, if you went and bought a brand new Toyota truck and now have a loan payment, then you might not qualify anymore. So you got to be ready to rock with that.
Absolutely.
Put your name on, and then we go through the home buyer selection. Our primary criteria is, of course, that they have to be an adult. They're
Aw.
a citizen. It's not anybody from out of state. You can't do that if you're not a resident of Hawaii. You have to be
Yep.
income eligible, so your maximum and minimum income level, the affordability, assets. We want to make sure that the family moving into the home will be able to have the right percentage of debt to income, and credit worthiness, of course.
Mhm.
So we don't want to put a family in there and have them have a problem with it.
Qualifying later or
Yes,
maintaining the
exactly.
property.
And then there's a
Biggest issue is
secondary
important.
criteria that's like a point system. And again, these are like the families, you can't see their names, you can't, so nobody knows who they are. But then it's like their residency, whether they're a first-time home buyer. You don't have to be a first-time home buyer with us. And
I did not know that.
yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that. And the reason is we do have some families or some, young folks that got into a condo early on, and now they've had 3 kids and they're living in a
Oh, wow.
studio or
Yeah.
1-bedroom apartment, and they need to expand. And so it is an option for them. Of course, if you are a first-time home buyer, you get a little extra check
Oh,
there.
that's great.
Yeah. Appropriate size. You're not going to move a 2-people family into a 4-bedroom house. The need of the family. So if it were a family who was displaced from the fire, if it's a family who's getting ready to get booted out of their rental, that their applications, how long it's been on file, their community involvement. And I really like this aspect of it, because if you're a volunteer in the community, you've been, say, out with some of our cultural organizations, maybe you volunteer with Hilton, and or you're out in the Lowy or over, in Honokawai Valley, that matters. It matters what you contribute here. That you have heirs. So if you have heirs that can inherit this house, that it can become an ohana, a family estate. And then there's some additional criteria. So it's a point system.
Let's talk a little bit more about the history. Now, we do, mention the differences between traditional leasehold properties, Native Hawaiian ownership. Of course, those do have difficulty with passing to heirs, because they have to have, at least 25% to inherit and then 50% to own. And now that's not necessary, but more importantly, the idea of leasehold ownership is not unique to this situation here, this community land trust. It actually is copied throughout the world in different locations, as well as other parts of the United States. So one of the more famous is, of course, Taiwan. They have large areas of the city that's actually owned in conjunction with the Taiwanese government. And they have lease ownership, and they work collaboratively with them on creating and maintaining affordable housing, so that they can have a better guiding hand in shaping the community. And a lot of people don't realize this is actually they got that tradition, those ideas from Hawaii. So it's kind of funny to see it transition over to Taiwan. And now, as we are seeing the overinflation in real estate prices, as the reincorporation or the reintroduction of this form of leasehold ownership. So, do you know anything about that kind of history and how it's played into these roles?
Well, we definitely are different than the historic
Yeah.
Hawaiian leasehold situation. I want to
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
break
please.
those apart. I don't know how familiar folks are with the history of that in Hawaii, but it wasn't necessarily fantastic. So, there is a difference in that the government is not involved in owning it. It's more a community minded.
Hmm.
So the community steers what the use of that land is. I'm not super familiar with how Taiwan is handling it, in terms of having a government in charge of leasehold
Hmm.
properties. But with the community being held, like the growth of the community land trusts and those leaseholds, they're growing in areas like Canada. It's usually areas where gentrification is happening, rent stabilization needs to occur, and the community wants to take control of how things are going.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's hard part too, because the whole idea behind rent stabilization is to maintain affordability. And
mhm,
but the problem that we see with that is, of course, when you have cost of ownership exponentially increasing, oftentimes you see the rent increasing simultaneously.
mhm.
So it's hard, and that's why there's such restrictions to rent controls. And it's quite understandable, because between taxes, maintenance fees, and build costs, it is just they're typically not in alignment to have those kind of rent controls. So in my opinion, it's always best to work towards creating housing specific for affordability, as opposed to hamstringing owners to deal with the consequences of those, laws and rules being put in place, and which of course can cause housing shortages and other strife for other families. So what, to me, would you like to see from the county in order to further and create more housing for Hawaii?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Magic wand.
Yeah, no doubt. Other than $1 billion.
Yeah, and lots of water and all sorts of things. I think, well, money. I've been applying for some money.
Mhm.
So I would love to see some funds that we can utilize to at least build our houses. I think as an island and an island community that I think we do need to start thinking a little differently. I like
Yeah,
how
long-term
you
planning.
talked about how we need to address it in terms of affordable housing. I want to plug that if you are a builder who has the opportunity to build housing, and you do have to do that 25% affordable housing, if you were to put that housing in a community land trust that is in perpetuity, you only have to do 20%. So if anybody wants to give us some opportunities
Yes,
there,
that'd be perfect.
then they stay affordable forever instead of timing out after 10 years, which is like the problem. One of the
It's interesting to see
problems.
that with the rentals too. I didn't realize this, but some of the developers, they go and they acquire land, they get their affordability, and they have the rent controls on these properties that they produce. And then they sit there, they get rented out for 10 plus years, and then they sell them later on. It's like, well, it doesn't even become a rental forever. It just ends up becoming, a normal market rate property. And I'm just like, gosh, there's got to be a smarter way to go about this. But there's these unnecessary restrictions, like, it is, Maui is literally the most difficult place in the United States, almost the world, to build. And that actually includes national parks. I mean, a national park for a small project, like a house or whatnot, usually takes about, 6 months to a year. Where here, it's taking 1 to 2 years in order to build a project. You can actually, there's for building a hotel on chunks of land that they put aside in park areas, it usually takes 3 to 5 years in order to go through it, which of course, that's not really happening in Hawaii, even with the zoning. But just to show you, you can get stuff done, but the process and how we set aside and divide our land and use is there's all these different, Kihei has their own group of people, the county has their own group of people, the state has their own group of people, and they put stipulations and rules in place at these different levels. And they don't oftentimes interweave and have the same goals. So it's so difficult, and why we're starting to see steering towards these, nonprofit corporations like Clover. What is it called?
Oh, four leaf.
Yeah,
The,
Four Leaf. So, hopefully we can get the county to be in alignment and have central goals with the developer. Like water being one of the big ones. We utilize about 40 million gallons a day on island. And I think 30 million is from groundwater and 10's from surface. But we actually have about 389 million gallons available per day in different regions. You can actually look at the map. It's available through the water department. And it's just a question of putting the infrastructure in place, having the central goal and a plan. Now that they have the ability to change zoning, I would love to see a collaborative effort to sit down and actually set aside strips of land that are specific for these affordable programs, because there's enough housing on the island. There just needs to be a financial process of getting into that housing, as opposed to making the impossible leap to jump into something that's 15 times somebody's annual income.
Definitely. And having those, the diversification. So depending on where people are, that's where they can start so they can move up.
Yeah.
I know, I mean, we have these young folks that are starting their families, they're educated, they're ready to contribute to the community. I taught for a long time here, and they want to come back and they want to have their families here, but they don't want to necessarily, they love their families, but they don't want to live with their families, with their family, like in a little teeny house. They don't,
Multi-generational housing.
multi-generational, but it's at some point it becomes too crowded. And we have a family on our list that has like 8 people. So I really want to get them in a house. I want everybody to have something. But when it comes to, I think, planning here, we mentioned earlier, is having everybody have that voice, that community have the voice. I think sometimes when we have our leaders come together and they come up with these ideas and decisions, and then they bring it down, if they haven't brought in the cultural conversation, the environmental conversation early on, then they're just hitting the roadblocks that could have been taken care of earlier by honoring other people and having them in that conversation. And I think a lot of people have been left out of that conversation for a while. And that's where community land trust can come in. And some communities are taking that on. I think we talked a little bit about, there's a group in Canada, in Nova Scotia, and they were experiencing like people coming in and developers, and they weren't learning about it until it was already starting, and they were just watching everything just become a mess. And so they started organizing and purchasing kind of little areas in the neighborhoods, and kind of taking ownership of it, even having affordable community land trust rental properties for that rent stabilization. Now, that's not something that we're doing.
But that works really well, because if
but
you mix in a market component as opposed to a rule stipulation, it allows for the market to evolve downward trending, as opposed to putting, handcuffs on being able to maintain a property. So, one of the problems is if you're going to say, hey, you only allowed to rent a property for this much, then they just won't rent it. And that's the big fear. I mean, it's having those hiccups in place can create more restrictions as opposed to creating more housing and at a more affordable price. So that's why I think it's important to create housing as opposed to, destroying people's livelihood.
Well, we definitely need to create housing. We lost so much of it.
No doubt.
We definitely need it. I really hope that the community voice is helps in that creation.
A question is, okay, so when you buy an Hale home, if I wanted to build, let's say, a shed or expand the house, do I have to come to you? I'm trying to understand it more, or is it just, hey, you can do what you want on there? You know what I mean? Because a lot of buyers ask that. Are you guys going to be checking on the house? I noticed on the website it talks about if I sold it in 10 years, I get to keep a certain amount of profit. Can you go over those two just real quick with me?
So the first part of that, if you were to want to make changes to the house, it would depend on the change. If you're going to redo your floor, you don't need to talk to us about your floor. If you would like to add a bedroom, then that would be a capital improvement. And to receive, appreciation on that, for the resale, that would need to come through us, of course. And then you'd have to have a licensed contractor. There are some requirements there. And
Yeah, no owner builder.
yeah, we got to be careful with that. So yeah, electricians all licensed, because remember, we're thinking about the future. There will be people living in it later. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's a different family, and we're thinking ahead because that's important. So also like a change if you wanted to put in a pool or something like that. Remember, these are affordable housing units, so maybe you could do that, but that's not going to add any kind of appreciation to it. That would not be a capital gain improvement. We don't allow leasehold solar because that encumbers
Oh, that makes sense.
the homeowner that might follow. It would follow the property, and we can't allow that. So you could purchase it outright if it was cheaper. I wish. I
Well,
keep.
and just so everybody's aware here, if you ever get the opportunity and you're really thinking about doing a lease ownership for photovoltaic, don't do it. Go to a bank and get a loan on that. That way you own the lease. The problem with getting a solar agreement is that if you ever want to move to ownership, they usually charge 3 times the normal install cost. So it's significantly cheaper. And your payments will eventually end if you go and you just talk to Byron Yap, and they have loans that are available that you can just put against the assets of the property and the assets that they're installing there. And then, as opposed to having this long period of time that goes on and on and on, it can be paid off in a 5, 6 year period. And that's it. Your payments are done. So, and they're very simple. So please, if anybody's thinking about getting solar and just paying the solar company forever, don't do it. Talk to a bank. It's much, much easier and cheaper in the long run. But I digress.
That's
So,
good advice if there's any solar companies out there. Instead of
yeah,
knocking on my door trying to sell me a leased solar system, have a cost already. Like if you want to buy it outright, this is how much it'll be.
that's why I like Pacific Energy so much. They don't have salesmen. They have a price your own tool on their website. So you can just put in your address, give them your copy of your electric statement, and then they'll go ahead and give you an estimate. So it's a more automatic process. You're not talking to a salesperson, and that extra 20,000 that gets tacked on there doesn't get tacked on there. So uh,
Thank
Pacific
you.
Energy, if anybody's looking for photovoltaic, they're fantastic.
I wrote that
And
down.
Wiki Electric's really great too. I've had wonderful experience with them. To kind of go on a little bit more, now I do think that this is great and important to celebrate your successes. I know that you've had trials and tribulations associated with this fire, but how many properties are you guys working on in partnership right now?
Well, we have 50 properties.
That's
We have,
amazing.
yeah, it's pretty good. We have 7 lots in the fairways, which are right next to the Maui Health Foundation homes. They built
Perfect.
16. They're beautiful homes. If you've had a chance to get over there, they're amazing. And so hopefully we'll be getting on that, and we'll have 7 homes built over there. That's a project that we are focused on. And then we're open to ideas, of course, but we're I think like everyone, we're getting moving with helping everybody rebuild and then focusing on a strategic plan for the future. If these prices of these houses are going to stay what they are, we can't buy a house, then
No, it's
that's a
impossible.
huge subsidy. And to sell it,
Yeah.
our last 2 homes that we sold for about 490 a piece, beautiful homes. They were like $1 million home.
Yeah.
But that's not a sustainable model.
It
So
really isn't. And the
yeah.
cost of building has dramatically increased since you've even become a board member. I mean, you used to be able to build $280, maybe 350 a square foot, and those are, ancient numbers between the cost of materials and labor. So, that's something that you guys have to take into consideration on building new, but also the whole market as a whole. I mean, if you see these increases on the bottom, you're going to see it at the top as well. So, have you guys thought about doing anything else, like spitballing ideas of prefab homes? Because I've been caught on the highway and seen some of them rolling in at, 11:30 at night towards Lahaina. It's pretty impressive to see what they can fit on a back of a truck.
It is. We have a lot of ideas and we do have a great board and they bounce the ideas around. When I went to the summit, there were like the 3D house builders and they've done some great affordable housing in Austin, Texas. If you ever get a chance to check that out, they're cool, but getting those materials, like looking at the cool concrete that they use, it might be a little cost prohibitive.
Yep.
There's some Mark Dikos is working on a living building, so working on affordable housing
Yeah, you
models
told me
that
about that. I really want to check that out. That seems amazing.
it's interesting, and being on an island and thinking about sustainable building practices, it's something that needs to be a conversation. Like, are we going to grow utilize bamboo here for flooring? Or can we use some materials? Are we going to bring some prefab things out here? Are we going to use concrete slab? I mean, I think that there should be an open conversation about it amongst friends, of course, like
Yeah.
letting people share their ideas freely, and who knows what we can come up with.
I'm actually, everybody's like, share ideas freely. But, the hard part I see is that there's so many people sharing ideas that there's no central, dynamic person that you can rely on with a goal in mind. I personally think that there's a little too many cooks in the kitchen, that the bureaucracy's gotten out of control. And that's why you're seeing successes in Lahaina in terms of getting permits through, as opposed to other parts where housing is still in an emergency level.
Yeah.
I love the idea of having the input of the community together and having people collaboratively work on their home and their people, because we are family and we have our Kihei community, we have our Lahaina community, we have our Central Maui. But the problem is they don't necessarily understand all the rules and implications that they can be putting in place that restricts and make building impossible. NIMBY is one of the most powerful and difficult things that a developer can have to deal with. And if, even with fast track processes, you see lots and lots of land that is available, like below Laniapoko, where you see a perfect opportunity for higher density central to the island and creating housing specific for Lahaina people. And there's of course a whole multitude of ways in which that land could be used specifically for affordable housing, or in partnership with Nahalio Maui, or setting stipulations so that is to benefit locals. But instead, the project gets introduced even through a fast track process. A developer gets mentioned, they're a bad person, and then the project gets shot down. So, and of course, the major issues will always be available resources. Water, right? Well, you put another link in a chain that's weak and breaks, it's going to make it more difficult to get that approval. So when they put something and they say, hey, you need to get water, and then there's a new water commission in place, they just say no immediately, then things can't get built. So I personally would love to see, a water commission in place where it's their job to find water, not say no to people, because the water is available, maybe not right in Laniapoko, but in other areas through different well processes, they can acquire water and transport it. It's a question of turning taxable incomes into infrastructure processes. If, we use that $20 million a year and created a government issue bond, that could be $200 million to increase water infrastructure. And water is always the continual issue. We'll
And
see it
with
again and again. Until we address that issue, it's never going to have a solution.
well, and I live in Kihei, and I used to do a lot of water work over on the west side too. And you know what happens when it rains in Kihei? Like the management of the runoff is, ugh. We do need to plan with the future in mind, and that future involves slowing the water down, allowing it to do what it needs to do.
Drainage basins and such.
Yeah, recognizing what the land used to do, because it's gonna hedge towards those places, and yeah, a central place to really plan would be ideal.
It's
Keeping it,
amazing to hear, I've done a bunch of habitat restoration, up country and, and it's like this all used to be koa, and sandalwood forests. Yeah, it blows my mind, the idea, like these dry riverbeds used to flow, if you go through a process of reestablishing native plants, work towards creating drainage basins so that it percolates back down into the soil as opposed to creating mud water that goes in the ocean that just, destroys our reefs, and more importantly, creating resources for housing. It's something that we could have a collaborative effort, but the problem is it's like, oh no, you say we're gonna go and we're gonna scrape a bunch of dirt in order to create a drainage basin up above. It's like, even though the intent is there and the idea is to create more groundwater available for, natural flora and fauna, you will still have incredible hurdles to overcome in order to have that, goal. That's why I like, if you create a program, specific to managing water, it shouldn't be restricting it. It should be creating infrastructure to distribute it. So it's like, I think the West Maui Water Commission is a fantastic idea, but they need to have their mission statement on, we need to get water to people who are suffering for the lack of housing and expensive housing. We need to find where this water is and get it to the people that need it, as opposed to saying, nope, nope, no. Like, I think those are great, but we need to have goals in mind that stop having Maui's people suffer.
yeah. I believe even as we think about, incentivizing all the, as we're rebuilding or we're building different places, is contemplating, do we need sod everywhere?
Hmm.
Maybe some native planting, maybe like the 5-foot build away from the house with the plants. Just there's a lot of ways that we can conserve it, doing things a little differently, building
Native plantings are
more
a really great
mindfully.
way to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's bringing the community in too, recognizing the ecology that we have here. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity that we have. We just got to bring it together. Hopefully, as a community land trust, we can be a part of that,
Yeah.
um, be a part of that plan. Again, our
I
board
think that for
is,
fire mitigation too, when you see these invasive grasses, the fire burns right up to the native shrubbery and it stops because it doesn't have that bridge to jump. And it's a really good way, because after millions of years of evolution, these native plants have learned how to deal with it. These invasive grasses aren't made, and high winds and we saw the results of it. So,
yeah.
definitely, I think that having a central plan and community input is essential, but there needs to be alignment. And otherwise, we get these bureaucracies that just continue to collide into each other. Like you said, can't we just get everybody on the phone or a Zoom call? And it's like, we all have the same goal. We do. We just have a different plan on how to achieve that goal. So,
Let's
we got to
execute. Let's get
definitely
it going.
communicate.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure if you're aware, like HILT, which is the Hawaii Land Trust, but they're a conservation
Oh, I
organization.
love them.
You've
Yeah.
probably been over with them. They're
Oh,
wonderful.
yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And they're building up that native plant area in case, I mean, there was issues before with the landslides and the water, and
Hmm. Hmm.
but it will protect us. So
Protect us, protect our natural resources, and help for a more sustainable future. I mean, it's something that we all believe in the same thing. It's just a question of having the, community all come together for that same goal.
yeah.
Hey, thank you everybody for having the time to listen to us today. Carrie, tell us again your organization and your name and your role there.
Okay, it is Nahalio Maui, and my name is Carrie DeMott. Our website's www.nahaliomaui.org. And we are a community land trust that provides affordable housing opportunities for home ownership to families within the 80% to 140% AMI. And you can come on and put your name in if you think it might be right for you, and we'll educate you on it and see where we can go. You can always support our organization too by going to that website and donating. Hit that donate button if you want to kind of earmark it for any of the things that I talked about, being the building project in the fairways, or assistance in Lahaina, or possible other opportunities. You're welcome to plug that in there too. And you could also give me a call over here if you'd like to. It's 808-244-6110, and I'll be happy to chat with you about it.
And Byron, ASB, tell us all about it.
You can reach me at American Savings Bank in the Kahului branch, and look me up on the internet at asbhawaii.com. Thank you, Clint, and thank you. I learned a lot today.
And thank you for all joining us. I'm Clint Hansen with Maui Luxury Real Estate, and you're listening to Maui Real Estate Radio on the KAOI Radio Group. You can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts.